your new book you speak about that, about normality.
So let me tell you a story. This is in my book. Adolf Eichmann was the Nazi lieutenant colonel in the SS who organized the deportations of Jews from all over Eastern Europe, and particularly from Hungary and also Romania to Auschwitz. So he was involved in the killing of millions of people. So, as you know, he was captured, I think, in Argentina, kidnapped by the Israelis and taken to Jerusalem, and he was put on trial. And he was found guilty of crimes against humanity, and he was executed. Now, before his trial, he was examined by several psychiatrists. They all said that he was normal in every way. That one of them said, he's more normal than I am, you know, in his relationship to his family, to his children, to his friends, perfectly normal. So we have, here we have this perfectly normal person killing millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So what is normal? So normal has nothing to do with healthy. Normal just means it's a statistic. You know, if you're in Bucharest and if everybody in Bucharest tortured their cats, then torturing cats would be perfectly normal. And if you didn't torture cats, you'd be abnormal. So, but here's the mistake that we make. We think that normal is the same as healthy and natural.
Exactly. We in psychiatry, we said, and a lot of time you hear, go to the psychiatrist to get back to the normality.
That's right. And the normality in this culture is pretty sick. So, because this culture is not healthy or natural in many ways. So, that's the myth, that what the norm is also healthy and natural. The other myth is that people with so-called mental illness are abnormal.
Exactly.
But really, like if you're a small child and you're not allowed to be angry and you suppress your anger, you depress it, that's a normal response. So we have this false idea about norm and we have this false idea of what's abnormal. It's totally backward. It's totally backward. So what I'm saying is that what we call mental illnesses are most of the time normal responses to abnormal situations.
Exactly.
So we have this normal society. Look at what normal society did in 20th century in Europe. Normal people sent other normal people to murder each other. In the First World War, 20 million people were slaughtered. In the Second World War, probably 30 million, maybe 40.
In the communist time, we don't know.
Well, then you have the communist times in Eastern Europe. You grew up under communism. I did in Hungary, and perfectly normal. No, some of these leaders you can't even say they were normal. I mean, Ceausescu, I don't think he would fit anybody's idea of normality. But the people that worked for him and obeyed his orders, they were very normal people. And same all over Eastern Europe.
Do you think we can speak about the trauma of communists in our region? You know, it's very, very clear the trauma of Holocaust. It's very clear the trauma of you know, the wars, the first war, second war. But I feel it in my environment that there are very specific things that look very traumatic, that is very common.
Look, yeah, of course we can. I mean, we can talk about collective trauma.
Exactly.
You know, and when people are suppressed, when they're lied to. And it's very confusing because I grew up a good little communist. I really believed in the system. until I was 12 years old. And in 1956, there was the Hungarian Revolution. Then I kind of woke up overnight. But they're telling you that this is for human brotherhood and for justice and freedom. And meanwhile, they're doing all these terrible things that your parents aren't even allowed to talk to you about. Because if they talk to you about it, and if you talk about it, they're going to be in trouble. So it's very confusing, for one thing. It's also, people are very traumatized just by not allowed to speak their truth, by being suppressed. Not to mention being jailed and being tortured and all that, you know. But I'll tell you something interesting. Not to mention, then there's specific evils like the orphanages in Romania that everybody's read about, the terrible ways, because they didn't allow abortion. People were giving birth, but because they were so poor, they couldn't look after these children. So tens of thousands of these kids were sent to orphanages under terrible conditions. And we know what the outcome has been. Severe mental health issues amongst these children that were then adopted and brought to the West. And my God, what a disaster, you know, that they had come out of. So there's lots of traumas.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit easy at the same time because, you see, most people, I think most people in Romania or Hungary, they knew they were being lied to. They may not have been able to do anything or to say anything, but did they really believe what they're being told? Probably not. Here in the West, where I live now, the propaganda system is much more sophisticated because people are being lied to all the time here, but they believe it. This is a much better propaganda system than the communists could ever even dream about.
It's more efficient, like to be splitted, and we get more confused and more traumatized, something like that.
There's a lot of trauma and a lot of lies and a lot of confusion here, but people don't know it because the system is so much more efficient in its propaganda.
You know, now we live in Bucharest. Nowadays, it's the start of the beginning of the war in neighborhood here, no, and it's very triggered to the people of, especially the people my age and or older that remember the communism, the Russian, you know. How you feel that this kind of phenomenon of, you know, re-traumatized?
Well, I don't know. What's it like for you?
It's complicated, you know. It's a question that a friend of mine is here asked me what I have to tell to my children to not be traumatized in this moment. No, because we are traumatized, we are triggered, we are somehow minimum aware, but what to say to our children, you know?
But that's the nature of trauma, is that people are reacting to the past and not the present. And that's what it means to be triggered.
Exactly.
If you look at even the word triggered, it's an interesting word. How big a part of the weapon is the trigger? When you have a weapon this big, the trigger is this small. The weapon has ammunition, it has explosive material. What gets triggered is the explosive material in the weapon. Now, when I get triggered, I'm carrying the explosive material. I'm carrying the charge. I could decide to get all upset about the trigger, or I could decide to examine myself and ask, well, what is the explosive material that I haven't resolved yet, that I haven't defused yet? What is the explosive charge that I'm still harboring in my belly and my chest? That's a much more interesting question. So the way you deal with being triggered is when you get triggered, good. Now look at it, examine yourself. What exactly was triggered? What are you still carrying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So look inside.
Looking inside, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you don't know this, but let me, since we're talking about communism, I'm going to find you a quote here by Karl Marx, okay? And Marx said that self-viewing, self-examination is the first condition of wisdom.
Okay.
Now, how can you disagree with that?
No.
And for me, one of the travesties and tragedies is when you actually read Marx and you read what was done in his name, it's like looking at Jesus Christ and looking at what was done in his name.
Yeah.
So here's Jesus who teaches peace and love and non-judgment and acceptance and absolute compassion. And then you have all these Christian countries murdering each other in the name of their religion.
Mm.
It's very similar to what happened with Marx. If you actually read Marx himself, then you look what was done, it's just like the opposite. You know, it's a very common human phenomenon, actually.
What?
That somebody, some genius puts down a set of ideas, and then they have followers, and the followers do the very opposite. That's what happened with Jesus. That's what happened with a lot of these people. I mean, in almost any religion or ideology. So this is very common.
You mentioned compassion, and you have a very beautiful technique, compassionate inquiry. First of all, I would like to say that inquiry, you know, I have colleagues that make the training with you, but you know, in Romania we have a very nice debate about inquiry because of the trauma of communism. Inquiry is very securitate, you know, it's very. But anyway, but what I want, because the compassion, it's somehow new in our world, coming from the Buddhism, from the other culture. Can you explain what is compassion? What you mean by compassionate inquiry? Yeah. What is compassion? What is compassion?
Well, first of all, inquiry can be compassionate or it cannot be compassionate. So there was I saw a movie once about, there was a place in Hungary called Recsk, and Recsk was a concentration camp or a prison camp for enemies of the communist system. Now, most of these people were not fascists. They were actually socialists because the communists hated the socialists because they were so close in ideology, but they had a different point of view. So they suppressed so there's all these very experienced anti-fascist, patriotic Hungarian socialists who were kept under terrible conditions and tortured. And actually, many of the guards were former fascists because the communist system knew how to use these people for their own purposes. So I saw this film about a documentary, Hungarian documentary about this prison camp after the fall of, actually before the fall of communism, but after you could talk about these things already in the 1980s. So this one particular writer who was a political prisoner, he said, they didn't inquire with me. And I said to them, look, if you want me to confess to being Adolf Hitler, I'll confess to being Adolf Hitler. Just don't hurt me anymore, you know? So that's one kind of inquiry, you know? But there's no curiosity there. The Societatea, the Stasi, the AVO in Hungary, you know, they already know what they want. They just want the person to say it. They don't care about the truth. They just want a confession. So we're not talking about that kind of inquiry.
Okay. So you speak about truth.
So first of all, we're talking about genuine curiosity. We want to find out the truth, not so we can use it against the person, but so that the person can help themselves. So curiosity, genuine curiosity. And curiosity says, I don't know, but I want to find out. Because, well, Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will liberate you. So we're asking questions out of curiosity to help liberate that person. Liberate them from what? From their trauma. So that's the curiosity part. That's the inquiry part. Compassion, well, it comes from a Latin word, two Latin words. One is to suffer, and the other is with. So compassion means to suffer with somebody. That doesn't mean that you have the same suffering as they do, but you appreciate that they're suffering and you don't want them to suffer. So you're present with their suffering.
So it's intention, you have an intention.
You care. And that's a very human trait. Most of us are capable of that. Some people who have been badly hurt, sociopaths, presidents of countries, presidents of big corporations, they don't have much of it. They're quite capable of killing a lot of people for the power of their profit. But most people are capable of compassion.
You mean that compassion is something natural, human?
It is natural to human. It's even natural to rats, actually. We can see this in a laboratory. Now,
so we don't have to go to a monastery in Tibet to stay 7 years to discover it. Or maybe yes, but it's inside us.
It develops naturally in little children who are treated well.
Okay.
It develops naturally, very early, if they're treated well. Now, but it's not enough. If I see you suffering, it's good that I should care about that, but it's not enough. So there's a second level of compassion, which I call the compassion of curiosity, or the compassion of inquiry, where you actually, you're suffering. I care about that, so I need to find out why you're suffering. So let's say you're a drug addict, and you're suffering, and I care about that, but that's not enough. I need to know, why are you suffering? Well, you're suffering because you were traumatized and you're trying to escape the pain of the trauma. Otherwise, I might think that you're just stupid or making a bad decision, or you're morally, ethically deficient. But if I understand that your addiction comes out of your suffering, well, now that deepens my compassion.
So it's not judging.
It's not judging, no, it's curious, yeah. Now, there's other levels of compassion. I don't want to go through them all right now, but an important one is what I call the compassion of recognition, which is that, let's say you're working with somebody who's addicted. If you're honest with yourself, most of the time you'll recognize that you're not that different. You may not be as extreme as they are. You may not be suffering as much. Maybe you didn't have as much trauma. Or maybe you worked out your trauma, but they haven't yet. But you recognize in yourself. So when I was working with a heavily addicted population in Vancouver's downtown east side, here in British Columbia, I could see in myself everything I saw in my clients. I was just lucky I didn't neighbor. That's all. That was the only difference. So compassion has different layers.
Another thing that I found in rainforest, it's there are concepts of calling, of aligning, living in aligned life. Do you find your calling there?
So I've been a medical doctor since I was 33 years old, and that was a calling for me. I mean, there's something called me that I wanted to help humanity. I wanted to help in the health field. But that's not all there was. I was also driven. I was a workaholic. I worked too much. I took on too much. I neglected my own needs. That's what the people in the rainforest found out about me. Sometimes I neglected my family for the sake of working. That's not a calling. So what we're talking about here is the difference between being called and being driven.
The driven is right from the ego, we can say.
No, driven from the inside.
Okay.
Because maybe I don't feel that I'm important enough. So now I have to work all the time to make myself important. Or maybe as a Jewish baby, I got the message, which I did, that the world didn't want me. Well, then I'm going to work really hard to make sure that the world needs me. You know, so then I'm going to be a workaholic. So these are internal drives. Insofar as I'm controlled by these drives, I am not free. So the calling is legitimate. Being driven is unconscious and it's trauma-based.
Can the people, ourselves be part of the changing of the humanity? It could be that not me and you. We like a human being.
I think every human being can make that decision for themselves as to how they're going to live their lives and what contribution they're going to make and what kind of conversations they're going to have. And when they have those conversations, are they being curious and compassionate, or are they full of driven, compulsive rage and hatred? You know, these are conversations, these are decisions we can all make for ourselves. And I can't make a prescription for anybody else. I just know what it takes to be true to myself. And I think that's the decision we all need to make.
Gabor, thank you very much for this beautiful conversation. So, if we find our calling and live in alignment with this, in integrity with our true self, we can face any stress and situation. We, like human beings, as well as the world, need compassion. Stay in compassion. Thank you, Gabor.
Yeah, thank you.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră a Societății Omului Sănătos.